in this episode of the Critical Oxygen podcast.
So I had individuals this last block starting to get some decent exposure to, because a lot of them were still inside, but if they were able to get outside, the individuals that were getting outside, I was starting to expose a little bit more heavy gear and hill work. And if they were stuck inside, I was just giving them a little bit more heavy gear work.
Welcome to the Critical Oxygen podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your endurance potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson. I have a PhD in molecular exercise physiology, and I'm the founder of Critical Oxygen, where my mission is to build better endurance athletes through remote education and in-person physiological testing. Today I'm joined by continuing guest host, Coach Aaron Geiser, where we talk about how to shift from base training to race-specific preparation. In this episode, we discuss the transition from the general preparatory phase to the race-specific phase of training. We emphasize the importance of building volume during the general phase and how that volume will make you more resilient during the switch towards more specific race prep. Aaron shares his approach to specific workouts for running and cycling, focusing on race pace efforts and endurance strength work. Due to the higher intensity nature of race-specific work, Aaron also emphasizes the need to monitor HRV to ensure a balance between stress and recovery. Overall, this was a great conversation about how to transition your training to more specific race preparation with some very tangible examples of workouts and processes that Aaron follows. Now, without further ado, please enjoy my most recent conversation with Coach Aaron Geiser, all about race-specific training. Aaron Geiser, welcome back to the show.
It's always excited to be here. So how's it going?
Good, man. We were talking offline about a lot of stuff, and I think one of the big things is, a lot of people are starting to transition from kind of like the general preparatory phase of their training to a little bit more specific training with actually some races, at the time of this recording coming up in less than 8 days, I believe. So it is a fitting time for you and I to talk about this so that it comes out 5 months later and then nobody wants to talk about it anymore. But hopefully we'll release this a little bit early.
Well, the other thing is, I think we need to start taking a poll of who wants to pay for what we talk about offline so we can start putting it online.
I know. Like another conversation you and I have had offline is, this idea of I have, I don't know, at least 12 episodes that are all, kind of queued up and ready to go on YouTube, but they're just kind of, I don't want to just release them all right away just because it's just nicer to have a drip of content. So we've been thinking about ways to help allow people to support the channel, support us a little bit in terms of our endeavors in releasing this information and this content and stuff. So if you guys are hearing this and you think it would be a fun idea or a good idea for us to do something like a membership where you get access to, podcast episodes as they're recorded and published, or not published, but scheduled onto YouTube, let me know. That will help guide our decisions to try to do something like that. Just know I am trying to make it accessible to everybody. So, I think it would boost community engagement. It would allow people to get answers to the Q&A questions right away, as opposed to having to wait, weeks and weeks and weeks to have things come out. So if you think that is something you'd be willing to, donate, I don't know, a small sum of money, per month to be able to have access to some of these episodes before they get released, let us know. And, I am working on trying to make that happen. It's just when you're a one-person business, obviously things take time, and just editing videos and editing podcasts take time as well. But
we can also do uncut, and it's really, really probably quite entertaining. But
I was thinking about doing stuff too, where it's like people could have access to like, an extra live Q&A episode, once a month or something like that, where they literally get to come on and they get to ask us questions or type it in, and we get to answer them right there for them. Because I think that would be another value add for people too, right? You pay to be a member of, the Critical Oxygen community, and then you get access to Aaron and I's expertise in a sense, and get to be part of the podcast and help actually build a community. Because that's really what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to build a community of like-minded individuals who's all about trying to learn and become really the best that they possibly can be, whether that's sport performance, life performance, really any sort of, performance that requires a little bit of training and elbow grease and insight.
That's interesting. I just thought I was here to just talk. So
Yes.
sorry, just joking.
No, I love it, man. So we were talking about this general to specific transition. So if you wouldn't mind, let's just like jumping into the episode, starting with like, you have your athletes kind of finishing up their general preparatory phase. What does that kind of look like? And then what are you doing when you're trying to transition then into the specific phase of training? And for those of you who don't know, generally speaking, if you're looking at like periodization schemes and other things like that, you have a general or a base phase of training. Then you transition into more of a specific phase of training. Then you have competition phase of training, and then you go into a taper, and then you race. I'm pretty sure. Am I hitting everything there? Yep. So that would be like a general periodization protocol that you would see from, someone like Aaron if he was your coach. Right now, we're kind of finishing up that general phase, and now we're transitioning more into specific phase. So I will stop talking and I'll let you take it away, Aaron, with explanations and those sort of things.
So really kind of towards the back half of the general phase, we have addressed the needs of what we set out to do. So we wanted to increase volume. We want to potentially increase fat oxidation. We want to really start to get responses from capillary response and mitochondrial density. So there's not necessarily something special that takes place on the back half of the general phase before you go into that specific phase. It's more of just you kind of had this roadmap and you've checked all those boxes. Then when you transition over into the specific phase, it's your first introduction to the specificity of what your next race is going to be. So often if I have an athlete, let's say we're a couple of weeks out from St. George 70.3 right now. So I had individuals this last block starting to get some decent exposure to, because a lot of them were still inside, but if they were able to get outside, the individuals that were getting outside, I was starting to expose a little bit more heavy gear and hill work. And if they were stuck inside, I was just giving them a little bit more heavy gear work. I start to throw a little bit of harder run sessions through this block. So I'm starting to build up continual paces at, let's say in that case, 70.3 pace or Ironman pace if it's an Ironman. If we're doing an Olympic or sprint distance, we're just giving them a little bit more extended time at the paces that they're going to be racing at through one run a week. And then another run is going to be a little bit more of a spiky effort. So we're given some VO2 max of 400, 800s, maybe some 1K repeats, or we're starting to build up with a 500, 1K, 1500, and then build it back down. So there's a couple of different ways. There are a couple of different workouts that we're going to provide that exposure to and start to just bring up that higher intensity on that one session, with the other session dedicated to a little bit more of consistent race pace efforts.
Okay.
From the bike, we're going to start to give them, in that previous case that I was talking about, depending on the type of race course and depending on specificity of the race, I'm going to typically start to work in a little bit of strength, like heavy gear work. If it's like a race course with St. George, who has a decent amount of elevation throughout the entire race course, I'm giving them a couple of those sessions a week. If not, let's just say that you have a little bit more of a flat course. So we have, and I'm not going to say this is an easier course, but Oceanside is the one that you were referring to that's about 8 days out. It's got about 2,400 feet of elevation. So it's still got some decent climbing, but not a great amount. It's more of all of that is really through 3 main climbs. The rest of it is either a little bit of downhill or fairly flat. So with that, I'm giving exposure of strength work early in the week. Midweek, I'm starting to give them a little bit of 70.3, maybe some over-unders, or a over-under over or an under style workout, just to give a little bit of diversity. And what that's going to still end up equaling that time at intensity is going to be still kind of right at what we're shooting for race pace to be from a power output. We're exposing them to this and this is one of the times where I of course want heart rate to be tracked, but I am not necessarily going to place, okay, well, if we start to go up into zone 4, we want to back off. I want to see, there's going to be a point where if we get to mid zone 4, yes, we probably need to back it off. But if we start to creep up into that zone 4 and start to get threshold heart rate, I'm okay with that early in this phase, because what we want to do is continue to give that exposure. And over the course of 3-4 weeks, what we want to see the response to start is that heart rate starting to drop down to the heart rate that we want to race at the pacing that we want to race at. And that's going to really happen from the exposure that we're providing to that athlete. So in that case, that kind of takes 2 of the days. I'm giving still, if the athlete has time, 2 days of still more aerobic style bikes and runs. And if they have the additional time, then I will throw one more kind of brick session that has a little bit of that exposure to 70.3 race pace or Ironman race pace on the bike, and then also start to get them running off of the bike at those same paces that we want to start to dial in. Now, we might start it at a 4K clip and then move it up to an 8K run-wise, but we're just trying to get that exposure to be more specific to what they're going to race at in this point. So when we start to move into the competition phase, we can start to expand some of that time out, and we've already gotten some of the physiological responses from the exposure of this particular block.
Yeah, so one thing that I do want to add here is that the importance of the base phase, right, is to be able to build volume so that when you do transition to the specific phase, you are able to deal with the larger amount of stress that is going to be placed internally on the body. Because exactly like what you said is that some of these specific sessions will be zone 3 that'll trickle up into zone 4, because your body just, from a cooling perspective, from a stress perspective, from, just all of those perspectives is like, oh my gosh, this is new. And we need, it's like, so your heart rate could continue to climb up, and that's okay, as long as you've built up enough of a base that you can actually handle that and then bounce back from those workouts, regularly. So one of the questions is, for me, is do you reduce the volume at all with the transition into the specific phase, or do you try to keep volume generally the same and then manage the intensity based on how people are responding to those workouts?
The realistic answer is it's going to be different for each individual.
Yeah.
I have, and that's a common answer that we typically throw out around here, but that's just the scientific reality of it. So you're going to have athletes that recover better than others, whether it be just from a physical standpoint. Then there's others that are going to do the additional things that are going to help them recover faster too. So all of those things kind of do plan into that prescription to that particular athlete. So if an athlete eats a little bit better than another particular athlete, they are going to respond differently than that other athlete, most likely. And this is from nutrition, hydration, other things that you might complement just from the recovery practice, whether it be massage, stretch, mobility work, all these things kind of play into that part. So the answer to that question really, Phil, is it depends.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's important for yourself as an athlete to kind of figure out what actually works best for you, because time and time again, it's like I think people want an easy answer to a complicated question. And, Aaron's answer is typically it depends, or is almost always it depends. So that's like the only absolute that we have, is that it depends. So that's Aaron's answer for everything. And I think like that is such a great answer, because that requires you as the athlete, or you as the coach of athletes, to learn who the individual is and how they respond. Because I can tell you this, like after my PhD, and even continually into now, like I would say that I'm a generally fit individual, but there are certainly things that run me into the ground a lot faster than other things. And I've been thinking a lot about this, because I'm just getting back into running, and I'm trying to think about ways, when have I been able to improve my running the most without getting injured? And volume seems to be a big challenge for me. And I think because I just haven't done it very much, but every time I try to push volume and then add intensity on top of it, that's typically for me when I start to get injured. So in this sort of case, I would probably be a little bit more apt to reduce the volume a little bit, get a little bit more of that specific stuff. And when I say reduce volume, it could also be a reduction in the speed that I'm doing my aerobic training at too. Like it doesn't have to be at the top end of zone 2. It could be lower. It could be halfway, right
there.
Yeah. So there's also those ways of coping, because if you want to keep your volume high, because we know that typically volume, or at least the amount of accumulated volume, is a very good predictor of endurance outcomes, especially for these long triathlons like half and full Ironmans. If you want to keep that volume high, it's okay to slow stuff down. And this is actually something that I had to talk to one of my running athletes about, is that when we were trying to build volume, I told him, I was like, look, if we go from 40 to 50 miles a week, you're not going to be running 7-minute mile pace at, the first week you jump up to 50. You're going to have to back it off, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to cope with it. And I think it's kind of the same way with that transition from, general to specific phase, is that, at the beginning, you might be accumulating a little bit more stress than you were in that general phase. So you're going to have to probably back off those aerobic training days a little bit.
And don't even say you're probably. What I would tell the athlete is that you're going to.
Yeah.
And it's because athletes and type A personalities often are always going to push that limit to that next. Like if you give them a top of zone 2, most of the time they're going to get that heart rate right at zone 2. But
Yep.
that also means that it's ticking over and it's coming back, ticking over and coming back. So it's really important to dictate that, hey, look, this is the time where I want you to be mid to low zone 2, because here, when we were just coming out of that general phase, we might have had a couple of different zingers where we were throwing some harder efforts, but for the most part, there was not the collected stress was still very low, because the intensity was very, very manageable. Mm-hmm. There might have been days where you did take that effort up to the top of zone 2. There was other days where you maybe were sitting in the middle of it. So in that case, this is where we need to start placing more importance on those higher intensity efforts. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that those become the ones that we hit very, very well. Now, to be honest, as athletes, not everyone's going to go according to plan, but we are more likely to hit those correct sessions, or hit the intense sessions with the intensity that we want, by backing off of that aerobic in the middle of the week or at the end of the week. So therefore we can hit that higher intensity level of that specific workout. Mm-hmm. And that's what we want to look at it as. It is specific for a reason, to get us prepared to start exposing ourselves to what we're going to be seeing on race day.
Yep. Yeah, 100% agree. That's I really like that because it does give people the grace to slow it down, right? You know, and you as a coach, right? Like I'm talking to all the coaches out there, is like you should plan now when you transition to that specific phase to start to reduce the aerobic pace for people. Give them a cap that is not the upper end of zone 2. Give them a cap that's the middle, or even lower if you know that they're, you know, probably going to be selling their soul on a few of these workouts, because they can be tough. And the best way to burn somebody out is to expect them to go be perfect and go, you know, give their best effort on every single workout, and it's just not going to last very long. So, Aaron, one of the questions that I do have is, in the general phase for you, typically, you're putting those VO2 max intervals, right? You know, within the general phase, or are you typically staying a little bit away from those?
So depending on how long that general phase is for that particular athlete, 100% they're getting VO2 max. If it's a little bit longer, they're also then starting to get some exposure to threshold as well.
Okay.
So the answer to that is yes, 100% they are getting VO2 max. And whether it's typically, I expose it more on the bike than I do on the run. Like I might do some strides or short bursts, but I don't really expose many athletes to true VO2 max sessions in the general phase, just because my goal is run is just more stressful than bike. So I often want to make sure that athlete is durable and their legs are calloused enough. So when we do get to this specific phase and I'm throwing some hammers at you, your body's not going to break down. And I find that I've had the most success avoiding higher intensity run workouts in that general phase. And often I have athletes ask me, so when am I going to go fast? When do I get to go fast? When I see the time is right. And I know that sounds, but I am looking for you to be able to bounce back from easy workouts quickly. I'm looking at you being able to start to decrease your tempo and pacing at these same heart rates. That's when I start to see these things to come together. That's the time that we start to throw this stuff at you. So I do often avoid a lot of like VO2 max on the run just because of that fact, Phil. Now, there might be an athlete, and again, this is that individual scenario, but there might be an athlete where we finish the last year's events and we're like, I know what your goals are, and we have to get you faster. So I'm going to parlay your current fitness, since you're race ready right now. We're going to move that into some harder run efforts at the beginning of the general phase. Throw some harder efforts while still giving like the aerobic work that they need, but then pull them back from that hard effort, go straight back to general and straight aerobic work, and then start to give them more exposure. But again, we had a precise reason of what we were shooting for and a target that we were aiming for in that sense. So in certain cases, I might pull it off, but it's actually at the beginning, and that's only when I've had exposure with an athlete for a long period of time, and we're coming out of the race season, and I know how their fitness is.
Yeah, that's that's in a sense kind of how I'm approaching my running right now. Is I'm saying, okay, I know that I need to get back to faster running, so I am going to do faster work for a little while, but have adequate rest. And when I say adequate rest, it's walking the rest of the day, trying to accumulate volume by just getting more steps, and then it's doing, like really fairly easy zone 2 work on the bike with everything kind of going towards facilitating that recovery, so I can build up a little bit more of that higher intensity And when I say higher intensity, it's like it's between 6 and 7 minute miles. So it's not super high intensity, but it's like, for me personally, it's tough. So I'm just trying to kickstart my engine a little bit. And I've found in the past that just doing, just trying to accumulate, gobs and gobs of time at, like a heart rate that is supposed to be zone 2. I'm just going so slow that it's like, okay, I need to do something to kickstart stuff here. And then once I actually establish that, I'll back off a little bit, start to accumulate more volume with maybe one hard-ish, tempo-ish workout per week, and then continue to progress from there. So yeah, that's that. I like that approach, because I do think that it's kind of like I always say high intensity work is kind of like a sledgehammer for adaptation. And as long as you can adapt to it and not crack the foundation, then it's going to give you a lot of bang for your buck. But you have to be able to absorb all of that fatigue that's going to be associated with it, and make sure that you're not overdoing it.
And on that note, an athlete that does not either recover well, or does not do the recovery practice, or does not have proper nutrition, this also is going to dictate how much exposure they're going to get through the course of that week as well. Because if those boxes aren't getting checked, I can't put you through that kind of forecast that I talked about earlier, because you're more likely to break down too. So you might have moved from 3 or 4 workouts that are higher intensity. Actually, I should say about 5 workouts that are higher intensity through the course of the week from swim, bike, run. Typically, intensity on swim is just a completely different beast. But if you do not recover, you do not check some of those other boxes, you might drop down to 2 or 3 day or workouts of exposure of that, and then still have the other workouts as more aerobic development still. Because again, like you said earlier, it's about either you knowing yourself or the coach knowing that athlete. And with any time with a particular athlete, you're going to start to have these things show, and you need to react to that. And okay, well, this is what I want to do, but it's just not right for this individual. So I need to back it off and only give them exposure 2 or 3 days. And you'll most likely see a heck of a lot better results than throwing them up against the wall 5 days a week. And they just can't bounce back. They can't snap. And then they're not giving you quality sessions more times through the week than not. So that it's really, whether you're the athlete or whether you're the coach, you got to be perceptive. You got to recognize this. And also, if you're a coach that's just coming on with a particular athlete, this kind of seek for this early on will also help you and help your athlete by finding out, oh, I probably shouldn't throw this much stress onto this athlete this early. And often if an athlete can't necessarily answer that question for me, I typically go a little bit more conservative before I go aggressive. And sometimes we all kind of get into that frame of mind of, oh, well, this person's podiumed in their past, or they've done this, or they've done that. Don't get fooled by that, because they maybe have just been able to maximize their talent base on a lot of aerobic training. And if you do dump a lot of specific efforts on them, they're going to break down just like somebody else. So don't just say, well, this person has the success in the background, so they've obviously had this type of exposure. In certain cases, no, they just have that talent that they're putting themselves up on a podium, but they need to be kind of progressed through that process as well.
Yeah, I almost always try to start a little bit more conservative, than overzealous, because at the end of the day, endurance athletics comes down to how long can you consistently train, over months to years. The most successful people are the ones who have been successful, or who have been successful in staying consistent for months, years, even like sometimes like into like the decades. Um, so it's, so from that perspective, that's kind of what I always view it as, is I say, okay, well, if we reduce this person, from, like you were saying, like 5 intense sessions a week to 2 or 3, how much benefit would we get from potentially keeping them at 5 versus reducing them down to 2 or 3 and keeping them more healthy? And I think the answer is obviously it depends, but for most individuals, especially if you don't know how well they're going to cope with that specific work and the high intensity work, then just seeing how they cope with 2 or 3 sessions a week and then maybe bumping it up is better than, oh, well, we did 3 to 4 weeks with 5 high intensity sessions and now they're sick or now they're injured and now they have to be off for 6 weeks to a few months. That's way more detrimental to somebody's fitness than it is, backing it off and only doing 2 or 3. And I say only 2 or 3, but 2 or 3 sessions a week is still a lot. So yeah,
It is, but you could also, this is where there's different ways to paint this canvas too.
yeah,
You could maybe give them 4, back it down to 2, 5, back it down to 3. So you could still kind of operate. So again, sadly, there's just so many different ways that you can sculpt it. There's not one good answer.
well, and this is always something that I really appreciate about our conversations is that, it's like, I think a lot of the times people think in purely linear progression as opposed to, oh, well, 1 week you could do something that's like 5 intense sessions. And then the following week, it could just be 2 just to absorb all that stress that you did on the previous week. And then you could bump it up, then you could do 4 and 3, or then you could do 5 and 3, right? So you can play around with all of this. And like, I think a lot of the times the human mind gets stuck in this construct of 24 hours to 7 days, like the week, or, like that is like a block. And you don't have to be stuck to that either. You could have a 10-day training cycle, right? You could have an A week and a B week. This is something that I kind of played around with some of my athletes previously when I was coaching a little bit more triathlon, is like maybe your A week is like a focus on running and, high intensity running development. Then your B week is focused on cycling and cycling development. And you kind of switch back and forth so you're not accumulating too much stress at a specific, for a specific sport within a, say, 7-day period or one cycle, right? Because at the end of the day, it just comes down to, can you keep your athlete specific or consistent first and foremost? And then can you move them into the specific phase like we're talking about today and not overdo it in the beginning so then they can absorb all of that specific work and get really good at doing that specific workload for extended periods of time. Because at the end of the day, the single best thing that's going to make you good at doing a specific task is accumulating time at that specific task, right?
Yep.
If you want to get really, really good at, like, and this is actually really interesting because I think Roger Bannister, the first person to ever break the 4-minute mile, one of his training things that he did is he went out and he did quarter mile repeats at 1 minute per, quarter mile. And he just tried to accumulate as much volume at that 1 minute quarter mile as he possibly could. And obviously this was like before anybody knew anything about training adaptation or anything like that, but he was able to break it. And that is something that I just listened to Olav Alexander Boo, who is like the head coach of the Norwegians, talk about on the Peter Attia podcast. Is he said that he thinks that the single best thing, to making elite level athletes or just making an athlete succeed in their performance is accumulating time at whatever performance intensity that they're, going to be required to do that. That's why these guys were doing, I think they did like an 8-hour workout day, like a day or two before the Ironman, because they were continually trying to do specific work, at those intensities. And I mean, it showed. Obviously they're doing, we don't know the whole picture, but they're doing something right, because they had Gustav, who won and set the record at Ironman Kona, and then Christian got third, which is like absolutely insane.
And I mean, again, let's not get lost with two freaks.
Right. Yes. So exactly. They're outliers.
But this is also, during this timeline, I find that this is a very, very important time to pay attention. In my world, I pay a lot of attention to HRV for training in this case. And this is one of the requirements that I ask all my athletes to do and provide for me. And this allows me to make decisions based on, if we start to see a negative trend, okay, well, you're not coping to this. Like your parasympathetic nervous system is not being stimulated when you're at rest enough. If you're not coping well to this, we need to make an adjustment. So this is another thing, is it's where you should use all of your tools to make sure that you are not over stressing or overloading yourself in a negative way. We do want to overload ourselves to a certain level. That's how we improve. That is how we adapt. But we don't want to go to a point where we are sacrificing our sympathetic and our parasympathetic nervous system. And if we are constantly in a sympathetic system, which is that fight or flight, it just means that we are experiencing and exposed to too much stress. And that is where I feel like these additional measurements do come into play. And again, I choose HRV for training over any other type of app. I know that there's a lot out there, but this is the one that I prefer to get information from, because it is easily read. I have my athletes take it when they first wake up, so it's a consistent first waking. It might be at different times, but some things are taking it through the course of the evening at random times, where you might be in a REM cycle, you might be in a deep sleep, you might be awake, you might be in a light sleep. So these are going to give you a different reading. If I'm getting it right when you wake up, I tend to see a lot more stability in that. But this is something where I am going to look at that information. And if something even trends down, hey, what's going on here? Sleeping bad, kids are driving you nuts. What's going on? Give me a little bit more detail if I don't have it already. And it allows me to say, well, you know what? We did have a hard workout today, or we do have a hard workout tomorrow. It's not happening. We're going to make this adjustment. We're either going to back off and have a much lighter day, or maybe even we're going to have a recovery day. So I do think that this is where some of those additional measurement like advancements in technology provide us with some information that we can make better decisions off of as well.
Yeah, and to add to that, I had a really good discussion with Marco Altini on this sort of stuff, and he was saying that he likes to do those measurements in the morning, because the nighttime measurements are more affected by what you did leading up to sleep. Say, if you take a hot bath, if you eat too much before you fall asleep, if you drink alcohol, if you do other things like that, those are going to be more reflected in those nighttime measurements of HRV, which you're going to get from something like an Oura Ring or a Whoop, or I don't even know what other products are out there, but any product that is doing kind of those nighttime readings are going to be more heavily biased by your nighttime activity, rather than in the morning. That should be a lot less biased by those nighttime or those evening activities, because that's gone. That it's been almost 12 hours by the time you wake up in the morning. So you should get a more a state of that is more reflective of how your central nervous system is actually coping with the stress of everything that's going on, right? Like including the added training stress. So thinking about how, if you have a fairly consistent lifestyle, and I know it can fluctuate a lot, but if really the only thing that is changing in your life is adding more specific training, then, and your HRV is trending down, then you can start to say, okay, well, it's probably the specific training is just a little bit too hard, so we need to back off. And that's where I love that you're asking people questions. You're like, hey man, this is your HRV has been trending down the last few days. What's going on? Are you more stressed at work? Are you more, are your kids more, or, your kids being crazy and stuff like that? Are you just not sleeping well because we are overdoing it a little bit? What's going on? Because that's getting you a better picture of, okay, well, you don't have to do the specific workout on every Monday, right? It just needs to happen eventually when you're kind of in a state that you're going to actually be able to absorb and cope with that. And if your HRV is always trending down, then you're not doing yourself any favors by, just continually pushing it. You need to back off a little bit and then come back on, a day where everything doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be staying consistent, especially with HRV, because that is going to be an indicator of how your body is actually coping with stress. So another question for you, Aaron, is you said you kind of, when you switch into the specific phase, you do like a specific day. So that's kind of like, if I were to relate it to my running world terms, is like, that would be more of like the threshold, like the race pace sort of day, maybe extended periods of time where you're doing your half Ironman or your Ironman pace. But then you also said you kind of have like those spiky days. So still kind of developing a little bit more of like the surges in power, the VO2 max, the high end sort of stuff. So why do you like to do those as opposed to just like say, okay, well, in the base phase, we were doing some VO2 max work, and now we're just going to switch and it's going to be 2 specific days per week. Why do you prefer the specific versus and the spike?
Well, one, I feel like, what we do is not easy. So I like kind of those spiky efforts to expose the athlete to that just uncomfortable feeling and becoming a little bit more one with that feeling. I do feel that even if we're racing it, if we look at technically what Ironman pace is, it's just slightly above lactate threshold 1. So yeah, it's one of those things where you in sense could hold that for very, very long periods of time. But there's still points where it does feel hard. There's points where your mind is going to challenge you and ask you to stop. And I feel like, one, you're going to get some mental benefits from a hard session. But two, we're also still trying to improve what our threshold pace is. And if we can continue to push that elevation on the threshold pace at this right time to move that needle, it's going to allow us to potentially get some additional speed in that tempo session that is giving us that prolonged period of time at more of that race pace level.
Right. Yeah, I like that, because if you think about, like zones, really what you're trying to do is you're trying to determine where your physiology is changing or where your physiology is capped. So first threshold is, where we typically say zone 2 is. You called it lactate threshold 1. You'll probably hear it as ventilatory threshold 1, Nears breakpoint 1, so on and so forth. Fat max, that's another one. Ventilatory threshold 2 or FTP or critical speed. I know they're all slightly different definitions, but they're all trying to, generally figure out the same sort of physiological state where exercise goes from sustainable to unsustainable for anywhere between 40 to 60 minutes. And then the third cap is kind of like your VO2 max. So your maximal aerobic capacity. And then of course you have your sprint speed, which for a lot of us, or for a lot of those people that are listening here who are Ironman, half Ironman athletes, your sprint speed you probably have adequate sprint speed. And if you're sprinting during a race, you're probably in trouble. So by pushing up though, by doing this, like the specific work and then the spike work that I'm just calling it that for now. You're hopefully able to either push up your VO2 max a little bit more, push up your second threshold a little bit more, so it makes that specific work actually a lower absolute stress, because from the perspective of where your second threshold is, your VO2 max is, it's still your specific work is still happening at a certain power output, but now that power output is less of a percentage of your maximal capacity. So it's helping you actually have less of a stress during that specific work, and then hopefully your heart rate won't go out of control, or hopefully you won't see those deviations in your physiology as much as you did at the very, very beginning. So I like that. I like the combination of the two, because you're focused on pushing the high end stuff up, which presumably will then allow for that specific work to be, I say, a little bit quote unquote easier, from an internal stress perspective.
Well, and there's so many other things that we could probably go into. The thermodynamic aspect of things, the response to lactate. I mean, there's so many other things that we could probably talk about, but I feel like the way that we just addressed it is probably the most simplistic way for most people to understand and recognize that there is, we could go into really, really deep details of this, but in a lot of cases, it's just not worth it. We could do it in, science back hallways and rooms, and that's fine. But here, just look at it as it's providing you with the opportunity to elevate your ceiling and get closer to operating at or below, just below that ceiling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, sometimes like discussions about this sort of stuff get so far into the weeds that we lose a lot of people. So I like keeping it a little bit more high level. And if people do have questions about it, hey, what's actually going on with this response? Just ask me, and I'd be more than happy to dive into it. But I think like keeping the human body or the bodily response as a little bit more of like a black box, and saying, okay, well, we know that VO2 max is increasing, or we know that second threshold is increasing, and overall that is going to lead to less stress, less deviations during that specific work. I think that for most of us is the most important thing to understand. It's that exercise intensity that we're doing our specific workout is going to be less of a stress. And if it's less of a stress, then our body isn't freaking out as much, right? So
and also flirting with that allows you to break past barriers that you think are out there too. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's extremely important, where sometimes I've developed a low-level race plan for an athlete. And when I say low-level, that race is either like a rust buster, or we're utilizing that race as more of a breaking through a barrier. Mm. And in that case, hey, we are going to fly as close to the sun as we possibly can before you burn up. But that maybe is the right goal. Sometimes these workouts are going to teach you, oh crap, I can hold this for a lot longer than I've ever imagined. I would have shut this thing down 5 minutes ago, but I'm continuing to push hard at this point. I think sometimes that's extremely valuable for athletes, because they've been afraid. They've heard these horror stories, and they're just a little bit afraid to push to that point, feel uncomfortable. So sometimes this can be just a mental breakthrough on that case as well.
Yeah, I think I think workouts should be a safe environment to test, especially in the beginning of the specific phase. These sort of workouts are a safe environment to see what your capabilities are, because if you have goals of, well, I want to be able to hold 250 to 300 watts for my, you better be able to do it during workouts where you're only going, 10 minutes, 20, 30 minutes at a time. if you're actually going to be able to do that. But also there's going to be times where your heart rate isn't agreeing with the heart rate that was prescribed, for like the workout day. Say it's too hot, you're a little bit stressed out. You might have taken in too much caffeine, and that's gonna change your heart rate as well. So it gives you the ability then to think back and be like, oh well, when Aaron gave me this workout, or when I did this specific workout, at the beginning of this, like, I didn't think it was even possible for me to exercise at, a heart rate of 155 for longer than, I don't know, 60 minutes or something. And I ended up holding it for 2 hours, right? It's all, even though like the physiological stress may be a little bit higher than what we're expecting in the race, you're mentally also preparing yourself for times where things are going to feel harder during the race, because inevitably I think there always comes a time in an Ironman where it's like, man, I've been doing this, like just above zone 2 for a really long time, but it's getting really hard right now. And those are, I think that's another big value add to doing something like to doing this specific work, especially not always clamping your workouts to, an internal variable like heart rate, right? Because it sometimes you got to get outside your comfort zone, and then you have to trust your coach that, okay, well, if you really go to the well on one day and they start to see these trends in HRV being lower, then, you're going to take some easier days. You're going to back off of your aerobic days, in terms of intensity. So it's okay. It's a good, safe environment to be able to practice this sort of stuff.
Well, and to add on to that, due to what you just said, recognize you might fail on a workout or two.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. It's the opportunity is there to learn from that. So yeah, as a coach, we don't want to build too many workouts where our athletes are failing, but sometimes it is okay to fail, or it is okay not to meet the expectation that you set up for that particular day. Because think what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to get better, and we're trying to put out our best output. And in that, sometimes we, as I said earlier, we're going to fly as close to the sun. Sometimes we do get too close to the sun. I often use this reference of it's that electric fence. We want to get as close to that electric fence before we shock ourselves.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're going to touch that electric fence and we're going to shock like crap out of us. But we learn something from that, and we have a new, okay, I know now next week just to go a little bit shy of this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I want to get comfortable week in and week out at being just shy of that, what electrocuted me 2-3 weeks ago.
Right.
So recognize that a failed workout does not have to take that failed perception. It's a learning lesson. And if you fall short, step back, recognize, okay, well, maybe it wasn't my ability to hold that today. Maybe my nutrition was not up to par, or maybe I did have some stress walking into this, or I didn't sleep well the night before. There could be 100 different things, but sometimes stepping back and just, it was this, it wasn't that. But don't just say, man, I failed on this workout and you didn't get anything. No, you got something from it if you step back and you learn from what you might have missed. Yep. Next time, it's just like in science, Phil, right? Where if we have a hypothesis, we test the hypothesis. If we fail to that hypothesis or don't meet that hypothesis, we reframe that hypothesis and start testing it again. Mm-hmm. So this is the exact same thing, where what caused us not to meet that thought, and let's test it again.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, it's a learning process, and it helps you reframe, right? Because obviously there was something going on in your thought process that was maybe misguided when you had that first hypothesis, and now you tested it, and now you can be like, okay, well, this is what actually happened during the last time I tested it. So now this is what we think. You're just continually learning. And I think I think that's something that a lot of people, especially myself, like it took me a really long time to learn that failure is okay. And because I was so scared to like let anybody down, let myself down, by like failing a workout or whatever it is, that it like almost limited me from even trying. Um, so that's why I keep saying like these sort of workouts are a safe environment to push yourself to get as close to the sun as you possibly can, to get as close to that electric fence as you possibly can.
I
And
saw
if you
you
tell
laughing at that one. You like that one.
I did because I have an electric fence right outside with the two horses that we have at our house, and every once in a while I brush my elbow up against it, and it scares the shit out of me. Um, so so yes, it absolutely made me laugh. Um, before we kind of wrap things up, could you, or actually to wrap things up, could you give just some tangible examples of what an early phase specific workout would look like, maybe from like a run perspective and a bike perspective for a half and a full Ironman athlete, and then maybe what one of those like spiky days would look like?
Okay, so let's just say let's take the assumption that bike course is flat,
Yep.
run course is fairly flat. So we're not kind of diving into some strength specific work. So it could be some exposure of, let's say, an 8-minute rep of up and unders. So the up and under is going to go above what you suspect or project your race pace to be, and then the under is below that race pace. So we have 2-minute exposure above, 2-minute exposure below, 2-minute above, 2-minute below, break. And then maybe do that 5 to 6 times. Good warm up, of course, on the front half, and then a cool down on the back half. That's a good exposure for a bike of something specific. And again, that would be, you could take that same shape for a half Ironman distance or a full Ironman distance. Your projection of, let's just say, 250 watts. So we're going to have an exposure of 270 watts above, 230 watts below. So you're just going to bounce back and forth on that. It equals at 250 for that particular repetition. The early stage specific run could be a tempo session where we are doing maybe a 5-minute exposure at Ironman or 70.3 pace. Then, of course, the goal would be to continue to progress that over the time. Or you could fall on a 15 to 20-minute warm-up, start at 4K, and then 4K at race pace, then a 1 or 2K cool down, and then just try to increase that rate, or that 4K up to 5K, 6K, so on and so forth. The spiky effort, I mean, let's keep it simple. I mean, one of the old bread and butters is just 1K repeats. So
Yeah.
maybe starting at a good warm-up, a little bit of 1 minute on, 1 minute off, VO2 max, or get into that RPE of an 8 or a 9, then get into that VO2 max, or get into that 1K repeat at a good 9 to 9.5 feel. But what I often recommend to my athletes, and just do it 4 times, but what I want to see is consistency. So if I see that athletes, now we're on Training Peaks, I see that like pace is up here and then just slowly decreases. I see that as, no, we didn't pace that properly. I would much rather see that straight line. So, or I would even like to see it go slightly up and you finish a little bit stronger. So pacing does matter on this, but we want to go by feel and recognize this is not a workout that you want to focus on heart rate, because again, depending on how quick you are, some individuals might be running this in 250 for a 1K. Some others might be running in a 5:30, a 6-minute. We don't know. But let's take that individual that's running that 250. It's not, they're going to be done with that session before they really get like steady heart rate values. So I want them feeling that particular workout, or go in with a consistent pace that you're going to hold,
Mm-hmm.
and then just hold that for the entire length of time that you're running that 0.62 miles
What?
or 1 kilometer.
Yeah. What's the rest period that you typically recommend, especially in the beginning of those spiky efforts?
Well, that again, it depends.
Yep.
So based on the athlete, it could be, let's do a static 2-minute recovery.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody else, it could be, okay, we're going to really, really slowly jog for 200 meters and then pick it back up.
Okay.
It could be somebody else that comes down and maybe we're in low zone 2 in that case.
Mm-hmm.
So it really kind of depends on the athlete, the fitness, and what kind of run acumen that individual has as well is going to depend on that particular set and that particular recovery.
Right. Yeah. Because you could make this type of workout, like a 4x1K repeats to start. You could make it kind of a VO2 max workout if you made the feel a little bit higher and harder, and then extended the rest a little bit longer. Or you could make it more of a tempo workout if you slowed it down a little bit and then did a little bit shorter of a rest. So I like that because it's very versatile in terms of like the stimulus you can get.
Well, and like we talked about, I mean, everybody's anaerobic work capacity or W prime is going to get rebounded a little bit differently. So
Mm-hmm.
it's more of, again, we want the repeatability.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't repeat that same, so if you come out and let's say you do run that first one at 3 minutes, the second one come back at 4. Yes, we have not found that right distribution.
Yeah.
I would like to see 305, 305, 306, 305 or something.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want a big differentiation between each repetition in this case. So if you do go out, you hammer, you electrocuted the crap out of yourself, and then you come back and you're running 5s after running a 3. We've done something wrong in this case. So
Yeah.
it really is, for an individual that has never done this before, I will have them approach it a completely different way than somebody that has been exposed to this. So that has been exposed to it multiple times. So
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to just say this is what to do, because I am still going to approach it differently from that athlete that's never done it. And what I'm going to say to that athlete that's never done this before is, okay, our goal is we're going to come out and run this very first one, and your goal is to match that second one, match that third one, and match that fourth one. If you get done with this routine today and say, man, I felt like I have more to give, that's better for me because you were able to repeat those 4. Next time we're going to go shopping for a little bit more. We're going to go expensive next time.
Yeah.
But this time you were able to repeat it, and we got that exposure. We have a baseline now. Let's go test that the next time.
Mm-hmm.
I would much prefer that than that athlete going and just burning every matchstick in the book and just, I don't have anything left, coach.
Yep.
Okay, well, we might have gone about that a little bit incorrectly.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example, because you could say, with this beginner, right, is like if they're a fairly competent runner, you could say, okay, let's just start between 3 and 4 minutes, and you pick what you think you could do for 4 times with a 200-meter jog in between. Then then you see, okay, well, after that first workout, they hit 345, 345, 345, 345. You're like, perfect. So and then they report back to you. They say, hey, I think I had a little left in the tank. It's like, all right, so we're going to come back next time, and we're going to say, okay, well, maybe next time hit 340. And it's this iterative process where, and this is how I almost exclusively test my or do my intervals now, is I have an idea based on the testing that I do of what I could possibly hit. And then I always start a little conservatively, and then I see, or I figure out what I eventually can get to consistently, and I'll either bump up the power or lower the speed, or increase the speed to lower the time. And that is great. Like, it's not, I think a lot of people don't experiment enough with like the way that they can, combine these, intervals and other things like that. And the other thing we didn't even talk about is you can change the rest period too. So you could
Correct.
say, you could say, oh, well, now I'm only going to jog 100. I mean, that's half of the rest. But, maybe that is the stimulus we're looking for. And it's, so there's all these different things. And I'm sure at some point you and I will talk about, actually dialing in things like tempo work and developing threshold and then developing VO2 max. And that was the VO2 max episode was or how to do VO2 max intervals, I think was like one of the best episodes we had, because people just love like that level of detail of like decision making and stuff. So we'll probably, make something for specific work or threshold work or whatever it is. But we'll save that for another day. We're at 1 hour and 3 minutes, and I think it's time to wrap it up. So thanks everybody for listening. You can always catch me on Instagram at Critical02. So if you have any questions about this specific training, really any sort of training, physiological adaptation, let me know. If you want to comment, you can comment down below. If you're on YouTube, you can leave us a comment and a review on Spotify. Reviews are always super helpful. Leave us a 5-star review. You can catch Aaron on Instagram at Try A Geiser. And like I said, we're out here just trying to help answer questions for people and make things a little bit more clear and sift through, all the craziness that can be out there. So if you guys have any questions, please let us know. And Aaron looks like he has something to say.
Yeah, we also do at enduriq.com. We also have some blogs and posts of information on this as well. So if there's anything that you would like to do a little bit more research, don't hesitate to head on over there and get some quality information. We also have some courses on certain topics about this. So it's always beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good plug. EndurIQ has got a lot of really, really valuable information, and I'm hoping to build out critical oxygen as well with that sort of information too. It's just not there just because of all the things I have. So head over to EndurIQ, check out all the information that they have. And if you, like I said, if you guys have any questions, let us know, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.